May I have a motion, please, for the approval of the final agenda?
So moved.
Is there a
Second.
There's a motion by Jim Dunlap and a second by Don Suddeth. Any discussion on the motion? Any objection to the motion? The motion carries unanimously. The next item is the nomination of officers. Nancy, I'll turn this over to you.
Okay, so pursuant to your policies and your procedural manual, at the first meeting, after the expired members' positions are filled by council, which occurred yesterday, a chair and a vice chair will be chosen, and the LPA members, you can nominate a person for each of these positions. There is not a second that's required. The vote will be taken in the order that the candidate was nominated. Positions can be filled by majority vote. If a majority is not received, second ballot will be taken for the two candidates receiving the most votes from the
I think, so there's a motion. Is there a second on the motion?
No, there were three.
Don seconded.
Oh, Don. Seconded.
4-0.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Likely this morning? Please come on up. We're glad to have you. Good morning.
I'm Catherine Cantlawn, and my sister and I live on Madison Court in the house that my parents built in 1964. They started it in 64. And I'm just here to ask you not to allow any big, tall buildings. My first visit to Fort Myers Beach was in 1953, and we spent the winters here until we were all in school, and then we used to come for November and December. And then we finally moved here full-time, and we lived at Red Coconut. And it was our home away from home, and we arrived in a 16-foot travel trailer with 5 of us, and we ended up buying a bigger mobile home so that we could live more comfortably. And then my father decided to have the house built by a local builder. Think about it, back then, no nail guns, right? Think about it. So, and it was Bud Bailey, who was a person who lived on the beach, and he was a builder. So, but we're concerned about the new buildings. I went to the meeting for the Red Coconut property when they had it at Pink Shell. And one of my questions that I asked him was he aware of the height restrictions when he purchased the land? And he said, yeah. So it was kind of like, yeah, but I took it as, yeah, but I didn't care because I know I'm going to build what I want to build. And having a restaurant and a park does not sway me either way to let those tall buildings go up. And, you know, Sanibel became a town before we did. And do you see any tall buildings over there? No, because they're sticking to the plan. And I would like us to stick to our plan, because I think, you know, if you weren't here in 1960s, then you don't know. If you weren't here and you know about why we became a town, because of the county gave a piece of land, sold, gave, whatever, we're not sure, but they gave a piece of land away, which was a established easement to the beach for the public, and it was across from Virginia Ave, and it was in the middle of Diamond Head, which is a wonderful facility. They do a lot of things for the beach. I understand that. But they bought the land here and they bought the land here and they didn't have this. And the county said, oh, sure, have it. And so, it was, and as you know, that's the north end of the island was established first. So those people had that easement for years and years and years. And all of a sudden they didn't have the easement. So if you could possibly stick to your guns of the plan that was made by the people who cared the most in 1995 when we became a town.
Thank you very much for your comments. We appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Thank
That's my
you.
sister. We live together at the house.
Is there anybody else who would like to make public comment this morning? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the next item. We don't have any public hearings today, but we're here specifically to talk about public benefits. And I'm gonna, Judith, do you want to start off the conversation?
Either
Use
one.
either one.
So mostly I see my role today is in gathering your feedback, comments, input, and kind of putting that together for you all. Some things I was thinking about coming into this that I think might be helpful is when you're having your discussion, thinking about what the next steps might be, what the results of this might be. I might suggest doing a joint meeting with the town council. Sometimes things are lost in translation. If staff can certainly present your ideas to town council, but it might work better if you all do it together in that kind of joint forum. I know there are in the works, we don't have dates yet, but for meetings for the comp plan. And then after that, for the revisions to the land development code. So that would be the time where if there was agreement to make those changes and add those input, we would need that for the comp plan first, and then later for the land development code. And I can make suggestions about where, if any of those changes might go in those places. I would also suggest that you think about definitions of terms. I think that from what I've seen has been some confusion. How you might define a view corridor. We've seen some differences in the way that's designed and defined. And some of the projects you're going to see coming forward, people get creative with the definition of that. So if there was a definition from you all about what that was, what that looked like, could you put parking in a view corridor, that type of thing, I think that would be helpful. And not just for that term, for some of the other terms. Restaurant also, I mean, it seems like we all know what a restaurant is, but is that mainly food? Is it a bar? Is there live music? How big is, so there's some things you may want to think about in creating definitions. And I think that was the main thing, thinking about where you're going to take this in the next step, comp plan, land development code, what kind of meeting you want to have, what kind of, how you want the process to move forward. Because I think that from staff, we would certainly like to have a step forward in the process. And then we're here if you have any questions about how this works from our end, when the builders and developers come in and start asking us questions, how we handle that internally before it gets to you. And certainly any other questions along the way. Is that helpful?
Very helpful.
Okay.
Thank you, Judith. Anybody have comments on what Judith just said? I foresee that our next step would be that joint meeting that we've talked about now for months, and hopefully that might actualize. But, I know the result of the Seagate case, but I did not watch the entirety of the meeting. I just watched the vote part. Nancy, were you there?
I was.
Can you just summarize the discussion about public benefits? Was there anything that might be helpful here to us today that the council talked about yesterday?
Well, there was a lot of discussion concerning the height, the parks, some of the other amenities that had been, and I use the word amenities kind of loosely, that were embedded in this project. I mean, basically, yesterday's meeting, in my memory, is that it complied with procedural requirements. Everyone had their say. They did go through the proposed document, the proposed development agreement, not in as much detail as the LPA did, and they were quite complimentary of the LPA for taking that deep dive into the details. But there was discussion regarding the highlights of the parks, a little bit further discussion about what constituted a park, specifically where that roundabout was, adding, I think, a water fountain, some additional amenities, discussion of a possibility of having a bathroom that would comply with FEMA as well as other, regulations. But there was no real discussion as far as what constituted a special benefit or a public benefit, to my recollection. And Judith, if you want to add to that, I don't remember anything.
Yeah, I agree with Nancy. I mean, what we're looking at now, there's some examples that we put in the agenda that Sarah had pulled from other places, and then certainly your all's input where you're talking about this is what a public benefit is, and this is how we're going to define it, and this is what we're going to trade off for. There wasn't a conversation like that about is a park worth 2 stories or that was not, but they certainly did review what the defined public benefits are and the development agreement. Certainly, if you have any questions about the development agreement process, because we're going to have to fit this conversation into that process as well. I don't know whether we're going to see more of those moving forward, but we may. So I think it'll be important, however we choose to talk about public benefit, that fit into both the CPD process and the development agreement process.
Yes, and in resolution 24-73, it's in section 2 that talks about minimum requirements, and there is a description of it's 2.16. This is where a special benefit comes up. I mean, we're calling it public benefit, but I believe it's intended to be the same. A description of any special benefit to the town as a result of the development, such as, so these are descriptive but not mandatory, the promotion of economic development, affordable housing, hurricane recovery, provision of needed public facilities, provision of public lands or recreation, and or the elimination of blight. So
Elimination
such
of what?
as is
Oh.
blight. So such as is descriptive of, but not mandatory or restrictive, I guess is one way to say it.
Mhm. Okay. I was just wondering if they had, if they, I mean, we talked a lot about public benefit. I was just wondering if they had elaborated on it at all. None. Okay. Okay. Jim, do you want to start since you proposed, you had a written proposal? Don, did you get that by chance?
No, I don't recall seeing that.
Neither
Neither
one
did
of
Doug.
you?
No.
It's
Had he left when I passed it out?
It should be in the, it was in
Yeah,
the packet.
I thought somebody was
Yeah,
going
it's
to send
in the
it, but I
agenda.
didn't get it in an email. I'll look.
Yeah, it's in the packet.
So for Doug and Don, my approach to this was to try to get a conversation started. My personal beliefs around how these things work are to try to establish fairly global guiding principles, things that in forensic analysis don't argue one way or another, but these are things that say there ought to be at least a knock at the door that we recognize, and these kind of things are familiar to us, and they ought to have the baseline of these before any details get put around it. So you'll see in the document, I've brokered a set of guiding principles here that I think are the gateway to any conversation around a developer or an applicant providing an argument for public benefit. I went on then to categorize some natural destinations, if you will, of the offerings. And all this is to create a common language where I think we can talk to each other, we can understand what we're trying to represent and demonstrate. And there's a requirement in some way, shape, or form to fit into something that our community believes is of value to us. And then after the categorization, so you've got some natural convergence points there, I went in and put some tiering. And the tiering was meant to start to put a magnitude factor on here where the amount of what you're asking us to consider on your behalf should be similar to or align with the magnitude of the benefits or offerings you're providing to us so that the trade-offs are obvious to the common reader and both the elected officials and those of us in these roles can have the debate with you about what degree of magnitude we believe versus what you're representing, including a financial impact. Seagate started to do that a little bit yesterday, I saw, for the first time, of putting some tax roll financial benefits out there.
What was that, Jim?
They went through the amount of taxes they're going to be paying, what portion of that would be to the town. There were some financial discrepancies on that because fire and schools and the library were included in there too. They should have extracted those. I would argue there's benefits to our town to have all those things paid for too. And then they went on to talk about the permitting fees and the ongoing real estate taxes of a fully developed product. So it was several millions of dollars you would expect with a project of that size. So in my document, I tried to give some illustrations around what tiering would look like, and they should be, in my mind, sequential. You have to meet the minimum tier 1 categories to get into the conversation about tier 2. If we don't get through that, then don't try to make your representation bigger than it ends up being through verbiage or other type of things. And it goes down to actually quantifying the financial benefit that the applicant believes the town is going to receive, both initially and perpetually, if they get approval for what they're suggesting. So a couple things matter to me as we're setting the guidelines here. It is, in my mind, the responsibility of the applicant to prepare, to provide, to argue, demonstrate, and defend what it is they're representing to us on our behalf. It is something that they're making a compelling argument around, asking for us to give them something that they need on their behalf. So I don't want the document of the conversation to slide too much to a prescriptive approach, because that limits creativity. And it also slides the obligation to the town to defend. You said you wanted this, don't want to get there at all, but somewhere between ambiguity and prescriptiveness is important so that we can have a conversation around it. I also was trying to protect the role that staff has in formulating an opinion on behalf of us, let alone the elected officials. I don't think it is their role to represent whether or not the public benefit threshold has been established, met, or exceeded. Although I do think they'll have an opinion on whether or not the guiding principles have been met, therefore the conversation is legitimate. But I'd like that to be our conversation and our debate and our discussion. I think that's what our role is here. And clearly those elected by the residents should have a full bite at that apple to see whether or not it's relevant to the community the way that the developer is representing it. So that's how my mind works in formatting these things, putting a conversation around it. I guess in the end, and I read through, as I'm sure all of you do, the public polls that have been out there through BeachDoc, 32 pages of what public benefit is and what height is and all that. And there's some natural conclusions one can extract from that. First one is it's all over the place. So we're right where we start, and therefore we should. But if you AI it a little bit, there's some common words in there and some other things that come right out at you and say, we as a community believe anything you guys start the sentence with the public benefit needs to include these kind of things. So there's some convergences in there. So I'm very interested in the reaction to the format and the document where people feel that is a starting point. And I'll close with this. This is one man's opinion. It's a straw man. I don't hold any proprietary emotions around what was created here, just that I believe form and format matters, as I talked about, so we can have a common conversation. So we can obliterate this in any way we'd like to come out with something better that our group thinking believes would help. And then I'm very looking forward to the interaction with our elected officials so we can have symmetry around our job now with their job, which is vetting what they're asking us to do before it comes to them for a recommendation or conclusion. I'll close with that.
Can I just make a statement?
Yes, please do.
Yeah, just a couple quick things, but one, I like the idea of the how do we quantify public benefit and the tax benefit, because I would wonder, if we took that as one of our guiding principles and said what was there before and what did it produce and what is going to be there and what does it produce, right? And so in other words, the red coconut produced probably a lot we couldn't quantify, right? If you have, I don't know, 100 and some RVs on the island for several months and they're, going to restaurants and they're going to shops and doing what they do on the beach, renting jet skis and cabanas or whatever, there's something there, right? So what does this new project do? If it's a residential community, is that going to be the same as someone that is visiting, right? If it's a hotel or if it's a restaurant or whatever that is, there's all kinds of pieces that we could quantify, right? So I love that idea of
Okay.
looking what was, but look a little bit further maybe, and you may have thought this, but just maybe I didn't read it or didn't say it, but what was there before and what's going to be there now and what's that going to do? The other thing is, I think a public benefit, I just wanted to make a statement as we start. A public benefit is not something someone has to quote unquote pay for access to, in my opinion. So if it's a private place, but you can pay something to enter, and I've struggled with this at Margaritaville, right? The whole
The pool.
pool, because I originally thought, oh, that's a public. Wow, I thought interesting. If I were the developer or the general manager, I wouldn't necessarily want it to be public that way. The way where it got to is you pay a fee to have access. There is public access for a fee. I can get my head a little bit more around that than I can a club or a restaurant that you have to pay an entrance to, right? If it's a private, say, exercise facility on the beach or a private dining room or bar, to me, those things are not quote unquote public, for which you should receive some exchange of value. The other thing is, again, just my opinion, public benefits to me, I mean, like the view corridor, great, we should have that. That should be fundamental to the extent we could get it. Beach access, at least on each side of a piece of property, should be fundamental. Other than that, this is probably where I might differ from others. I kind of don't care to some extent what you do if you follow the plan or you're close to the plan. Like, and the height is obviously the elephant in the room, right? If you're allowed 3 floors above parking, we all recognize things have changed. If you're coming to us saying, hey, I'd like 2 levels of parking, and I'd like, 4 or 5 stories or something like that, 6 stories, whatever. I don't know what the number is. That's one thing. But I think the other side of that is going the extreme. And I certainly understand with some of these projects that it's kind of like, let's see what we can get, right? And we'll fall back. We'll ask for the moon, and maybe we'll fall back to, something just barely out of the in the atmosphere. So those are just a couple of thoughts that I had around what we've already discussed and what's out here. If someone owns a piece of property and they want to develop it, as the town was established, I don't think there's a lot of need for other than the fundamental public benefits. Give me beach access, give me bay access, give me, whatever that might be. If you're going to ask for setback changes or something, maybe, you give a little bit of public parking or something like that. But those are kind of the fundamental thoughts I have around it. But, those are at least my initial thoughts and opinions.
Doug?
Well, I think in general, and what I'm struggling with too is public benefit is like how many stories I want to build is a very specific quantitative thing. I could say 5 stories above or 6 or 17. Public benefit is a vague, it's very hard to define. And I think I like the guiding principles that were presented, but I think our challenge going in all of these is going to be to find that balance between, the public benefit. So then we've got something that's sort of subjective. We can't really, we could say, well, 1 beach access equals something, but a developer comes in and I understand how they work too, and actually somewhat appreciate it. He's going to ask for the most he might be able to get, and he's going to offer the least, in his first presentation. And in my mind, going back to our last meeting, if you're going to ask for 17 stories, maybe you should offer up the beachfront or a portion of the beachfront as a public park. Make something real, substantial to justify a pretty substantial request. But I think what we're going to see, and we're going to have to work together to get that balance, is developers are going to come in with the maximum ask and the minimum give. and we're going to have to find a compromise, and it's going to be difficult.
Jim, a lot of your comments that you submitted were kind of incorporated or could be incorporated into the other gym's format. What are your thoughts?
Well, I tried to approach it from an objective standpoint, and I see a difference between a public benefit and an amenity.
Okay.
A public benefit to me needs to be perpetual in nature. I also, after seeing everything that's happened since our last meeting and looking at Jim's proposal, actually think that there are going to be benefits, public dedications of property that are clearly a public benefit. But then there's going to be some proposals that are jointly a benefit to the public, but also a benefit to the developer.
Right.
For example, this roundabout, it's an entrance to a parking garage, but it is access to the beach. So that sort of is a hybrid. So maybe it doesn't count as much as something that is truly a public benefit in perpetuity. But I agree with staff and your earlier comment. I have a hard time reconciling the council's vote yesterday and the council's vote on Estero Beach Club. And if I can't reconcile that, then I think we need direction. We're not the policymakers, but we need a clear path to analyze these projects as they come.
John? I agree with you, Jim.
So I think there's a commonality in what both of the gyms have put forward,
Yep.
which was the tiering, the whether you call it tier 1, tier 2, amenity versus public benefit. I think we can recognize that there's different classes of offer from a developer. Some that will be in their own self-interest and also may be of benefit to the residents and the visitors to Fort Myers Beach. And I think there's some value to those. The restaurant, for example. Obviously, we've heard loud and clear, and those of us from the South End know that restaurants on the South End are a public benefit, but they're private enterprise. And so I think that they are of, when I think of it, I think of the open to the public, free of charge, in perpetuity, top public benefit. Whether that's a beach access, which I think is easy but wonderful, and we need as many of them as we can. I think it's access to the sand behind the property, the mean high water line, for example. One of the things we talked about recently with the Seagate proposal was, so what's going on with the beach behind the roundabout park? Is that going to be cabanas, or is that going to be available to the public? To me, that's huge, because that seems to be like the front line of beach access here in Florida, not here in our community, but
Yeah.
further north it is. And I think it's really important because when I think of Fort Myers Beach, I think of it as an inclusive, publicly available beach. And
Yeah.
and to me, that's, you know, along with the bars and the live music scene, that's what defines Fort Myers Beach. I mean, it's the people and everything else, but that's the culture to me. So there's the in perpetuity, available to the public, free, all of those things I think are critical. They're the number one. And then we get to the things that are of benefit to people, like view corridors. I love view corridors. I really think they're important, but it's not the same as having a piece of sand. And then from there, you go to, well, actually, probably even ahead of that would be public parks that are bayside or just not on the beach, but public spaces that are available, giving up land, giving up access, those things. And then you then you back down and you start talking about access to amenities. That I think is the way that Jim put it, is amenities or maybe the other tier. And there's benefit to them.
Mhm.
I think what's important to the conversation that Don and Jim have brought up is the economic impact on the island. Okay, the viability of this island going forward is going to be very much driven by the investment that's made in this
Totally.
island.
Yep.
Right.
And I'm sorry, but we have to talk about that. I don't have the history on this island that many people have, and I try to learn from it every day. But I do know that downtown Margaritaville was blighted for over a decade. It was not good. And it was not good when I moved here, and it's gotten so much better. And actually, my wife and I had dinner Sunday night at Margaritaville, and it was awesome. You know, it really was. So economic development is also incredibly important, but it doesn't of itself make a public benefit. I think those other things of in perpetuity, of available to the public, free access, those things are really, really important. And then when we start to get to restaurants, we start to get development, we start to get things that benefit both the developer as well as the residents. I think they're important. I think they're really important, but they don't quite add up the same level.
When
So-
you all-
Anita, one little
Anita,
quick
I
comment.
Go
I'm sorry.
ahead.
I was reminded, and my document doesn't reflect this yet, but I think just get it in lexicon right now. There also be a bias for our residents versus our visitors
Sure.
as it relates to,
Yeah.
because the more attractive it is to become part of this community in that way, because you have access as that criteria category, then we grow the people that really matter. And those are the ones that are not only financially invested here, but they're emotionally connected to it that way too. So I should have done a better job in my document outlining that, but I was reminded that it wasn't there. And I just want to get that on the record. I think that's a very good ad. Sorry.
Nancy?
So if this was a town council meeting rather than an LPA meeting, I think Councilmember King might be saying you can't always get what you want.
But that isn't true.
but-
Because Councilman King has the cards in his hand.
I'm trying to just provide a little bit of levity
Okay.
and keep the conversation going.
Um,
I have to also
Karen's here.
advise you that, the whole concept of a development agreement is the fact that there is a project that's coming forward that is very unique.
Yes.
And any project that comes to you requesting a development agreement has to be evaluated on a case by case basis, right? And at stake is our private property rights.
That's right.
The rules that have been created in the resolution doesn't refer to a public benefit, it refers to a special benefit. And there may be a distinction there that we might want to further elaborate and discuss. Because whenever you come forward, you can't deal with two overriding concepts. So it's basically whether or not it constitutes a taking or not, being an extraction from the developer. You can't go down that road because there is potential liability there. So the benefits that are being derived should have some kind of nexus to the development itself. And courts have viewed that because of a nexus, that it doesn't constitute a taking. Although, again, it's factually based. So I can't give you a definitive answer. It's a case-by-case analysis as to what you're dealing with. And the other legal concept that you want to be aware of is that you cannot engage in contract zoning.
Right.
So you can't have this trade-off one to the other. And if you look at what was adopted in your resolution, it talks about any special benefit. It's not a required special benefit. So any special benefit that results is a voluntary act on behalf of the owner applicant. And it does talk about a special benefit. So I think your your task today is to elaborate upon that. I mean, it's been very widely discussed with lots of different concepts. I have not provided a legal opinion as to what you are finally putting on paper other than what we have currently in 2.116. So what you end up with, I will need to go back and analyze it and review it to make sure that we are not crossing the threshold into perhaps some kind of deprivation of private property rights, which would end up putting the town at risk.
That's really, really good advice at this juncture. Two comments. There are Supreme Court cases that have dealt with this already, so I'm sure you'll pull those out. I have them here too, about where you don't create the nexus, therefore it's tit for tat. But the other side of it is consistency among applicants. So what I'm hoping is there is a nexus around what our community wants, what the developers understand, and what they voluntarily offer, therefore, as something that matters to us. And it shows through full disclosure, they get it to be part of what ultimately we want in our community. So I think the caution around don't get too prescriptive and don't take away what they could do anyway is wonderful. The other side of that is let's amplify what we think is important and see how they rise to that occasion voluntarily.
Precisely.
I
Nancy,
agree.
do
And
you-
that discussion today, I think, is going to be very valuable to the LPA, to those that are watching, to the town council, to the community, to developers. So I'm glad to have the conversation, but ultimately what you proposed today, I'm still going to go back and review it,
Me too.
analyze it, make sure that you're not crossing that threshold.
Do you not find a conflict, or why was the word chosen? Because in 4C, 4C4, it talks about the height issue and public benefit, but then the development agreement says special benefit. So why does anybody have a comment on what makes those two words different and why one was used over another? I mean, it would have seemed to me for consistency, since the comp plan and the LDC talks about public benefit, that the word public benefit would have been used and not special benefit in the development agreement.
I'm not sure what the distinction is. That's something
I'm
I
not
would
sure
go
either.
back and look at. But if you recall, the development approvals or this whole development review process
Mhm.
was somewhat on a very fast track
Oh, yes.
through the LPA to the town council. And we have something. We have a new tool in our toolbox. But now the question is, how do we use it and use it correctly? And so this is what we're trying to figure out at this point.
To me,
So we may
special-
want to change that. I mean,
Yeah.
I need to look at it, and that may be part of the recommendation is to amend the resolution to make it public
And-
benefit.
and
But
to
I
be
think
consistent.
special might be,
Well, I think the word special and the word public do have different definitions.
Absolutely.
Special
One's
is
exclusive.
vaguer than public. It's
And it
broader.
has an air of exclusivity to it. So if it's special to me, it means something isn't special. You know, Don might be special and Jim might not be special.
I
You
agree
know?
with
That's
that.
the way I see
In a
it.
lot of
That's
ways.
But so to me, they conflict with one another in the essence of what they mean. Now, that could be just a ridiculous nuance, but all of this is nuanced. And I think that this definition is really important. One other thing I just wanted to ask you all, because you all well, most of you commented on in perpetuity. One of the most important things to me, and I'm only going to talk about a public benefit because I'm not particularly concerned with a special benefit. A special benefit to me is a special benefit for a development. They have a special benefit from the town or from whomever, but I'm concerned about the public. And so for the public to have a special benefit, to me, it needs to be exclusive to the public. Doesn't mean that the special people can't go there because they are also part of the public, but it needs to be exclusively public. So I'm just going to use the roundabout for my biggest objection to that was it wasn't a public park. It was, public could have some access to it, but it was essentially access for the development. So what really became the big public benefit for me? It wasn't the walkover. I mean, it was a 10-foot easement. Was essentially the only real public benefit I could come to. So I think that what I liked, well, I liked all of Jim's talking points because I agreed with almost with all of them. But I like the way Dunlap has formatted this because I think that the guiding principles are essential, much like the goals of our comp plan. They're
Absolutely.
essential.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, like the first one, accessible to or for the benefit of all. That to me is public. Every public, but then unique. I mean, it needs to be benefit for all and in perpetuity. It shouldn't be, because part of the development agreement, at least that we reviewed, that troubled me immensely was the ability for administrative changes, so long as they didn't have something to do with density or whatnot. But the public benefit didn't have anything to do with density, but could be amended administratively. And as we all know who have been here for any length of time, the I want to say whim, but whim is derogatory, and I don't mean it that way at all. The feeling of administrations and councils change. So they go from being very conservative to, to ultra lenient. And it would depend on where that would fall in here. I didn't like that flexibility at all. So if it is a public benefit, much like I'll use from Margaritaville, in my opinion, had true public in perpetuity dedicated public improvements and dedications. The parking lot adjacent to the pool area was a dedicated piece of property for the town's use, for public use. And then the other parcel that was also dedicated to the town that nobody really thinks about, but is instrumental into the realignment of the road coming onto the island. Those were dedicated in perpetuity public benefits. And to me, that's the standard. I mean, at least in my opinion, that's the standard. It isn't just, you can cut through my backyard.
Right.
That is way down the list for me. And I don't know how to, like I told you, I was a little discombobulated today. I don't know how to best memorialize that as a guiding principle. But I'm throwing that out there for you all to talk about. And one other thing, the financial thing, the financial element. So let's just say that Matt Price had said, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to dedicate the entire beachfront to the public. That would take it off the tax roll, and so the financial element would be negative. But the public community benefit would be enormous. So how do you balance that? That's a question for the money people, because it's not me. Those are just my thoughts for the first round here.
Nancy, back to your comment. If I look at 4C4, which is what we're referring to, that
Yep.
kind of started the dialogue around the definition. If I read the town shall balance the public benefits, I don't see that when I read that as a noun, as a thing. It's a concept. It wasn't a requirement. It wasn't a recommendation, an order, or a threshold. It just said they're going to balance it. So I don't think I think we're starting a new conversation versus building on that one. At least that's how I personally read it. So whatever that means or doesn't mean. And a little bit is around, let's be nice to each other. Well, what does that mean? In New Jersey, that's different than Ohio, both in language and behavior. So there is some of that. We get to make it ours. We get to do a Fort Myers Beach draft around what we believe and we care about. And then you got to test it, say, are we really allowed to implement it?
Correct.
And that's our role today.
Yeah, it's interesting the way you put that, Jim, because it doesn't say you get to do this. It doesn't at all. Does everybody agree with that?
Okay.
Snap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
It's
Yeah, 100%.
So the comment that there is a way for you to get from A to B, is that true?
But if you challenged our behavior a bit, I remember sitting here with the IBC and being surprised
Mhm.
that there was a requirement, official requirement for view corridors
Mhm.
as a code violation or something. I asked Jason in the moment. So somehow that became real.
Mhm.
And yet we see, I've gotten some feedback that because we have so many view corridors right now, you forget about Hickory Boulevard when you're driving down there. But that doesn't seem to be much of a trade-off anymore in the open conversation of, if you give us that, we'll do this. I mean, it just seems to have diminished in its influence.
Because it's required.
Yeah. And yet somehow that got in, whether it's approved or ordained or just practice now. And I just don't think picking something like that is right.
Jason, is it approved, ordained, or whatever? Because that did surprise me in that case as well.
Yeah, me too.
So I take your point. I would dispute that anything was forced upon that particular case. And I would remind everybody that they chose to do that because they felt it worked better for their site design, for the movement of their own people on the property. Remember that the code itself, the way that it is set up, says you will have today 60-foot tall buildings from ground to the top of your building. That's completely within code. You're 20 feet above sea level, and then you get an additional 40 feet above that by right. So they could have come in and said, I want to run across 70% of my property, 60-foot tall buildings. It's completely within code. Maybe I come ask you for an offset for the lower area shielding. But at the end of the day, they could have chose that. They chose instead to try and show a public benefit that worked with their design and gave them something that was much more compact. And they were looking to then, in my opinion, spin that up as a justification for some of their other asks on the property. So I think it goes back to your point today. What's the view corridor worth? How do we quantify what is inherently a qualitative thing? And how do we gauge that versus what they are asking for?
So one little additional reaction, if you would, Jason.
Of course.
Not for you personally, but for the staff. It seemed to me that during the conversation with our experts, they clearly got the impression that would be very valuable for them to represent and include in the project. So it does matter who you're talking to. If I'm sitting and having a conversation with Winston Churchill and tells me something, I'm going to think, hey, that's pretty cool stuff. So here's the town who basically holds their future in your hands. If you're suggesting something, I'm going to listen very carefully.
Mhm.
Is that what the applicants are extracting out of the interaction?
I think the applicants came in and extracted that staff was saying this is something that's in the comp plan. This is something that is mentioned as an alternative design metric in the LDC. So it's been put in there in multiple different places and took that. And staff said, look, if you're going to ask for a bunch of deviations, you've got to think really hard about how you're going to quantify your public benefit. And up to that point, staff had been hearing, yes, a open view to the beach is something that has been in both spoken word in meetings and
There you go.
qualified in the
that's right.
code as something that was wanted. So I think they did take that and run with it.
I think it's also when you think about the specific projects that are coming up, the smaller the project, the less opportunity there is for them to provide any sort of public benefit. They just don't have the real estate to do it, or it just isn't part of the project. And so one of the things I took away from what Jason just said was that even if they're building by right and it's 60 feet tall, we still would like to have some sort of
Right.
view corridor, and it's in our code, and I think there's value to it.
But if they met all the parameters, they're
Right.
not required to
They're
have it.
not, well, they're not required to have it, but we do have bigger setbacks and we do have view corridors being defined, so
Can I-
they are required to.
Can
Well-
I read you the language specifically? So we're talking about it. So one of the things that might be helpful in addition to a joint meeting is to have a kind of a broader meeting on this. I had, if we all have the same board members, which is good for consistency's sake. But something that I've done when I've worked other places is done an explanation of how planning works in Florida. The state regulation and then the county and then how we function here. I can find that to be very helpful for the general public because planning is a very specific profession and there's often a lack of understanding. We hear that constantly. Well, why don't you just build according to the comp plan, build according to the code? And those things are different every place and they function slightly different, but we all have, in Florida, we have framework which we abide by. So there's the comp plan, which the town should set out its goals and objectives, its policy of how they're going to get to those goals and objectives. And then the comp plan, the LDC, the zoning is the tool of implementation for the plan. So you come up with a plan, what we want, what our goals are, and then the land development code should tell you exactly how we're going to get there. This many feet, this wide, it's very prescriptive from a staff perspective. It should be easy to read and interpret. That's way everybody gets the best result. So if I could just read you the language that's actually in the land development code, just so you understand where staff is coming from. And when a developer comes in, any savvy developer who's done things multiple places, they have somebody on staff whose job is to read this code, to read the comp plan. And these people are very familiar with these documents, even if the town itself, the general public is not. So this is section 34-631. And that's where we're talking about the height. And then specifically, so it goes through the height you're allowed by right, and by right generally means you don't have to come before the LPA. You can go right to the development order stage, get your building permit, and go ahead and build without any kind of special.
Sorry, Judith, could you say
Sorry.
the number again?
So
34, 631.
631.
Got it. Thank
So
you.
that's building height, and then if you go down B5. Okay, so this is where it's telling you if you can't build what you want to do by right, in those few cases where individual parcels of land, so let's skip through that. Height regulation chapter would be unreasonable. Landowners may seek relief through the plan development rezoning process. So that's what you're seeing. A lot of these property owners are saying, well, the first floor, now we've got to have it raised. So we have to do parking there or something else. And then we're restricted in the height above that, which may seek relief through the plan development rezoning process, which requires a public hearing and notification. The town will approve, modify, or deny such requests after evaluating the level of unfairness. Again, it's a bit of an ambiguous word, unfairness, that would result from the specific circumstances and the degree of the specific proposal conforms with all aspects of the comprehensive plan, including its land use and design policies, pedestrian orientation, and natural resource criteria. Particular attention would be paid to any permanent view corridors to Gulf or Bay waters that could be provided in exchange for allowing a building to be taller than the height limits of this chapter. In each case, the town shall balance, again, the public benefit of the standard height limits against other public benefits that would result from the specific proposal. So they've taken the language of the comp plan, they've added a little bit more in there, but that's why you're seeing these things, because the developers, the builders are reading that and they're saying, okay, they want a view corridor, we're going to give them a view corridor. And so when they come to us, they already know this mostly. And then they're trying to, and I completely agree with Mr. Dunlap that this kind of ambiguity should not be handled at the staff level.
No.
That's not appropriate. But what happens is that they come and they say, well, what do you think they're going to approve? What can we do? We really want this. What can we do? And we'll say, well, we don't know. Or maybe you should watch some of the past meetings and see what other kinds of public benefits have been acceptable, because we don't want to be in the business of negotiating that. That is something that the LPA and the town council should be doing if you think that's appropriate. But I just want to let you know the view corridor it's
in
there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they're saying, okay, we know
Yeah.
what that is. That's easy to define. Whereas some of the other things we were talking about, restaurants, or this is an easy thing. They can put it on a site plan and they can measure it out and they know exactly what the reduction in buildable space, and they can quantify that.
So Nancy, that's a specific item that they trade for a specific request. Can we put 15 more things like that in that same section? Because your concern before was this intersection and
Right, but then it would, if you added to your LDC, your land development code, then that would, I believe, conflict with the language in your comp plan, because your comp plan only talks about view corridors. So right now, the two are together. They are consistent one with the other.
And where we are in the process right now, the comp plan is still open. We would very much, from a staff level, like to have that completed and
Right.
sent back to the state. They already did the first round. The state accepted it. So now the town has to ratify it. And that's what we've been talking about with the town council, about setting up some public meetings, getting some public input. If you listen to the very end of the meeting yesterday, Sarah was asking that. About going to events like the Christmas tree lighting or other things that are coming up to try to get public feedback.
Mhm.
Not everybody feels comfortable coming to a town council meeting. That can be a little intimidating, and trying to get that feedback. But we have to close the loop on the comp plan process before we can touch the LDC.
So I have a
I did want to make one comment that the very first line of that section says, in the few cases where individual parcels of land are so surrounded by tall buildings on lots that are
Yes.
Right.
contiguous.
Yes.
That's very specific.
Specific,
of
yeah.
Being
It
in the
is.
middle of the south
Right.
end, not.
Yeah, it is.
It is. So.
And then there's the other question about, is a view corridor, must it be unimpeded? Because there's the constant discussion about a parking lot is
Right.
not a view corridor.
Trees,
So what is
I
that
mean-
to us?
trees,
Yes, or
I
a
mean, a
pool.
landscape, yeah.
Yes.
An elevator
So-
pool, perhaps.
Or
So-
an elevated pool.
Landscaping.
So I have a
Yes.
question though, on EIBC specifically. Jason, you mentioned we could go, 60 feet high. We could cover that parcel at 70%, call it whatever. If they had did that, big box, big ugly box, right? 75 units. I want nothing more than I had before, which is pretty close to what they're doing. Could they have been denied because there's no view corridor, or would they had to? Would the town go, no, we're going to squeeze you a little bit to get the view corridor, and you can go up a floor, or something like that? Is that? I'm trying to figure out if that's a trade off.
I think that's actually a wonderful question, because the reality is, no, I don't think the town could have squeezed them. What they could have done, and this is allowable in the code, is if they chose to, for instance, tier the building and give further setbacks on floor 3 through 10.
Right.
In that respect, they would have been offered the option to go back and be able to get an additional floor, a few extra feet to complete an additional floor. But again, the staff and the code doesn't force you into that. There is a reality where you end up with 60-foot buildings
Right.
across 70% of the property by right, and they're just right
Yeah.
into DOT.
That's where we have to be careful, because I remember distinctly, unless I dreamt it or something, but Anita, you specifically, and others of us saying, hey, when they first came to us, hey, make this a little more aesthetically pleasing. Like it looks like a big kind of, you're walking down the street and it's right on the street.
Yes.
there's
that.
They had kind of what maybe they could have done, right? And then we said, go back and fix this. And they went back and fixed it. And I thought made it look really good. And then now I'm thinking, well, if I'm EIBC or those designers, I'm thinking, gosh, instead of, I can't remember what it was, 10 stories, maybe I should have did, the step up and then did 3 towers on that property, single wide. And then I give you your view corridor, you get aesthetics. And I'm just we got to be careful what we ask for. Cause I think someone said, Councilman King would say, you can't have it all, right? Or you can't have everything you want.
So what is view corridor?
Right.
What is it?
Is it on the edges? Because you can't have the setback, you don't ask
Is
for
it
anything there.
air? What is
Yeah.
it to you, Jim?
To me, it's a concept. It is where you have an option or an opportunity. An example I would give you is a parking structure under the facility. We require they block the view corridor. So I think that's in conflict.
Right.
So I would say as open as possible. It's better for the cars running in there and all kinds of things. And it's better for the public. And they use the one crossing Publix and all that all the time to say you can see right out. You can't see much, but you can see more than we did. So I think it's where opportunities exist to have line of sight, clean line of sight. And I'm not talking about uninterrupted because that's not, I don't think, realistic, whether it's cars or vegetation, et cetera. But you don't have mass blocking light views, and it just makes you feel more restricted as a person. Wherever that can be open and be clear for multi-purposes, I think our attempt should be to create view corridors that can be multi-purpose, but they're unencumbered for the general public from a view.
So yeah, general public. So that's really on the street, right? That's me
That's where you
standing
look.
at my eyesight. So from, a little, a little kid to the tallest adult, right, can see, right? In other words,
That's
if
right.
I have a house across the street, it's not a view corridor, or say there's a hotel across the street or a restaurant. It's not a view corridor because I can go up 3 stories and have a balcony that looks over and has a view corridor, right? That's really not it's really not a view corridor. It's really on the street,
Totally.
Or
I
driving
actually
by.
I have a problem with that. I really do, because personally, this is only my opinion, but in my opinion, a view corridor goes up to the sky.
So I
It's
I
not
agree with
an
you.
underneath the building
Yeah.
type of view. Even though I may be walking down the street and enjoy a view out to the bay or the beach, to me, it's the entire up to, I don't know how else to put it, but it's to infinity and beyond.
Yeah,
It's
if
up.
I could add to that though, like, because you're not going to get, you require parking underneath it. To your point, that's a conflict. You're not going to get a continuous view corridor on the road. So that's where I think a view corridor can be, between the buildings, down the street, down the beach access. It can be under the building. It could be that the building goes 60 feet. And then because it creates value across the street, right?
Mhm.
There's value in property, which means value to property tax. There's value in building a restaurant over there with a beach whale type restaurant where they can see the Gulf, right? For sunset.
But all
So
of those
there's
are sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I'm just saying, I think to your point, there's that view corridor, it might be blocked on the ground, but 3 stories up, it could be open.
It's
And
the
so-
neighborhood's objection to
Ex-
Seagate.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it is precisely that. So, yeah, it feels to me like there's like I always use the word balance, or but it feels to me like there's something there to say, hey, across the street, this property, EIBC, for instance, that's commercial property across the street. That could be more valuable to another developer to come in and purchase and build.
But you see,
something.
both can be true. And isn't that the magic of putting the onus where it belongs to the developer to say, not only am I going
Right.
to let you look through here, but I'm also going to create something that lets the sun shine in all the way to, and if you give them, if all that gets to count in the degree of magnitude they come to us with and trying to make their case, that's the magic, I think, in what we put out to them to do their job to show us that. That
Yeah.
both can be
Yeah.
true.
And I'll say on Seagate, I think Seagate had an opportunity. I know the thought was leave the beach side, for public benefit that I buy into or whatever it is. But, there could have been something to that there. There could have been units put over there, that
Absolutely.
still left the shot of the, might be obstructed across the street. So you might not get as much out of those 4th or 5th floor condos. But, there are, other.
Doug, what were you
Could
going to say?
I'm wondering if we could define a view corridor, something like this, like we have setbacks already, side setbacks. And part of that reason we have those is for views. But if you're going to say, well, I'm providing a view corridor, I'm going beyond that setback. I'm the view corridor I'm providing is an additional 20 feet to the
It is
setback I
required.
would have had to do anyway.
Right.
And then my view corridor, floor to ceiling has got one value. But if the percentage of that floor to ceiling that I obstruct decreases the value of my view corridor by proportionately, some sort of guidance like that to define Well, like came up on Seagate, it's like, well, view corridor, yeah, but you had to have parking anyway, so it's not really, you're not doing something
Right.
special,
Right.
you know. So I think what we're reaching for is when a developer makes a special effort above and beyond what he would have had to do anyhow to create a view corridor.
And there's the magnitude
That's it.
issue that I think I feel passionately about. I don't mind those descriptions at all. There's a great criteria for starting and making it bigger than you had to. I don't want that instead of all the other things we could get to, the view corridor stuff and how they arrange the pool and how they set that up. That having definition is clearly a magnitude issue. Having flexibility shows that I think a commitment issue to us that not only am I doing this, but I'm doing these three other things. Make your case.
Mhm.
So I would like both
Mhm.
because it gives us a magnitude.
Mhm. Mhm. Jim, do you have something to add to this?
No, just summary is, I think a view corridor should be an unimpeded
Mhm.
view of either the beach or the bay. And it should be something more than what is required by code.
Yes, that's what I've written down here, almost exactly. I wrote, the view corridor should be an open, clear line of sight, vertically and horizontally, to open space beyond the existing required setbacks. Does that define view corridor?
Yeah, the only thing I would say is beyond the setbacks, but it could be within the property too, right? I mean, it could
Oh,
be.
sure.
In the middle.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, it could be right in the middle, right? Or it could be like I mentioned on EIBC, it could be two down the property. They say, hey, we're creating these, we're giving you an
Mhm.
extra 5 foot on each side, and we're giving you another, 15 foot in between.
That's
Yeah,
magnitude
Right.
thing is way big important
Right.
for me.
Yes,
How
Me
committed
too.
are you? Yep.
me too. Does that give you an idea?
Yes, I was just going to say, and you're saying it not necessarily public access.
right.
Right,
It's not
right, right.
necessarily
Not
public
necessarily
access.
public
It's my
It is
eyes
not
access.
necessarily
That
public
It's for me to
access. Yes,
see.
Yes. Okay.
Do we want to just talk for a second? It came up yesterday, like a 3 feet wall to elevate the pool does that detract from the view corridor?
Not as it's been talked about here, because if you're walking down the beach, if there's a 3 foot wall and you
You can't see.
have a clear view of everything else, that 3 foot wall's not gonna bother you.
I agree,
Mhm.
but we
Right.
start talking about magnitude. Does a 5 foot wall get in the
Right.
way?
Yes.
Does a 6 foot wall get in
Yes,
the way?
yes, it does.
So,
Yeah.
so yesterday
Yeah.
it came to, I think 2 or 3 feet is okay. That's what was kind of bounced around.
Mhm.
And I agree with it,
Mhm.
but I think we should
Yeah.
either agree with it or not as well. Like, what do we think? Do we think it's 3 or 4 feet? Is
I think
that
it's
okay?
3 max, because I don't think I mean, the way the properties go,
Yep, yep.
even when I think of our condos down there,
Yep.
I mean, there's no flooding at the building a lot of times because it's around, it slopes up to the
Yeah.
building. So if you had a 3 foot wall by the building,
Yeah.
you would not see any sand or golf, probably. You just see skyline.
Yep.
You do, actually. If you walk by down there, that's all you see.
Yes, that just, you've been to my house. I have a 6 foot fence.
Right.
But the fence looks much taller because my yard is sloped up.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. So do we solve that simply with saying a clear, open line of sight?
I think line of sight is good.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I do too. I have no
Okay.
problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about public and special? Or benefit versus amenity?
So my reaction, public and special, would be, public is extremely general.
Somebody drives on the island. right?
Special is to whom
Mhm.
and in what context.
Mhm.
And again, since I think we all live in the real world, the definition of why this is special or should be to me, I want somebody to tell me that. Because I may miss the obvious,
Mhm.
and I want to be convinced. I heard you say at our last meeting, I'm listening, please convince me.
Mhm.
And that's a wonderful, delicate, professional way to say, I'm not getting there on my own. So if you have something I haven't heard or thought of, then give me the insights on that, because I'm willing to adjust,
Mhm.
but you got to make me feel special.
Mhm.
And I think that's the difference to me between public and special.
I could see,
Hope that didn't help
I'd
at
like
all.
to hear that. I want to hear that after Doug. I want to hear from Anita's.
yeah. So I don't know, this might be a little simpler than what Jim's saying, but like a public benefit, I'm going to dedicate a certain width, 15 feet for a public beach access. Anybody can use it. Visitors can use it. My own constituents can use it. It's in perpetuity. That's a public benefit. A special benefit might be, I'm going to open my beach club to not just the residents, but outside people. They're going to have to pay just like anybody else, but it will be open. That might be defined as a special benefit, but it's not really a public benefit.
I agree completely.
Fair
I agree
distinction.
completely.
Yeah.
So that was like, because to
Yeah.
me, a public benefit is in perpetuity. It is public, no
Not even a
parameters.
Fort
It's
Myers Beach
general.
resident. Could be somebody that lives
Could-
in
it's
Indiana
gen-
that just
it's
drove over.
anybody
the bridge,
who
right?
wants can walk
Right.
down that path.
Yep.
It is open.
Yep.
It's open completely. But
All
then
the
the
time.
special benefits, which is why I find that so conflicting in the development
Well, think
agreement.
about a special benefit as being the discount that Margaritaville
Yes,
provides to
exactly,
residents.
Right.
That
exactly.
is special.
That's a special
for
benefit.
residents.
Yes,
Right.
yes. We all agree with that?
Yeah.
Nancy, you got that?
The monetary benefits, I'm not certain how enforceable that is.
Doesn't have to be monetary. It could be people who live on St. Peter's are allowed, like the accesses that certain neighborhoods have.
Yeah, the deeded beach
A
access.
deeded beach access. That's not necessarily monetary, but it is specific access for a specific
In
purpose.
perpetuity.
And
a special benefit.
that's a special benefit to me.
Okay.
Because it only benefits
It's
that
only benefits a
subdivision.
certain group of
Like
people.
Mountain Parks access.
Yes,
is Mountain
any of
Parks
them,
access.
any of them.
Okay.
The Mound House
Mhm.
is public. Anybody and their dog can enjoy a walk at the Mound House. But a neighborhood park is not, is a special benefit to that neighborhood.
But could not a resident from another neighborhood access that park as well?
No,
Technically, they can, but they shouldn't if somebody's standing
yes,
there.
they're able to. You could walk
You
through
can.
there, but that is not your park. It belongs to
Right.
somebody else. It's like, could somebody walk through my yard? Yes. Should they? No, it's my park. It's my yard.
Maybe not a park, but a
Yeah.
beach access,
Well,
for
yes, a
example,
beach
is very,
access.
it's
Dedicated
deeded.
Yeah,
beach
but
access.
it be, well, there's a difference. Because the beach access would be available to the public regardless of where you live.
No, there are some beach accesses
That are
that
limited.
are
Yeah.
allocated to a specific subdivision
Correct.
Mhm.
where a general public's not supposed to use them.
Okay, so with that said, though, how does that fall within the definition of special benefit that is currently
A
in
special
there?
benefit is something that is designated for a specific group of people.
Okay, so what you're proposing would be a change to the definition in 2.16.
Yeah,
Because
then
that would be,
consistent with the comp
Yes.
plan,
And everything
LDC,
else.
right?
a
Do you want-
smaller
Jason?
subgroup of the public.
Or a subgroup, a group, period.
Okay,
I mean, public is wide open. Special closes that.
so that is different from what
Jason?
is currently written,
Yes, I
however.
know, I know.
I mean, affordable housing is in there. That might be specific to a smaller subgroup, those that are able to acquire
And to qualify for
residency,
it.
right, within that project.
Yeah, I would see that as a special benefit. It's a
Yeah.
good benefit.
It's
I'm not
consistent.
Jason,
demeaning it, but it would be a
Judith?
special benefit.
you had a comment on special?
I mean, I think that makes sense to, because that's what we're seeing being offered. So tiering that, maybe we tier it like that across the board. I'm looking at Nancy to see if that's possible, but like to have a definition of public benefit, I think that's very clear what you said, something that's in perpetuity, open to all, general public, like a beach access pass, like a public park. I think everybody can understand what that means. And then the additional special benefits is a restaurant, because you're gonna pay to go to the restaurant. People like them, they want to have them, but it's, or something that's limited by the fees or the cost. So like the affordable housing, you have to qualify through a program, and so that's going to be limited through the whatever government program they're going to access that through. or limited to a certain HOA. That
So
type of
let's
thing.
test our language then. Let's go to the tier 2 list I have here. And let's try to bounce these against special versus public and see if our definitions, those are natural for us to
And-
put some categories on there.
I do think you can further tier that within the public
Of
benefit.
course.
Sure, of
That's,
course,
I think
of
that, I
course.
think that's the next step here, actually.
Of course.
So run down those, Anita, and let's see how everybody feels about which category they see it falls into. in
So tier 2, those public benefits with significant financial and community-wide impact beyond those adjoining and or complementing the development itself. This category should include granular description and specific details on the community-wide impact or benefit, infrastructure, for example, as well as the projected financial investment or dollar value equivalent for any in-kind services being proposed. And then there are examples. Beach access improvements could include design, permitting, construction. Beach access with facilities that include public restrooms and showers.
So let's pause on that and see how people feel which category.
Yeah, I would
That-
say
that
that's a
should be
public.
It's a public
public
benefit.
benefit.
That would be
Okay.
public. yeah.
Perfect.
Yes, this is definitely public.
This is helpful for us to practice language.
Absolutely. Off-site public parking garage.
I think
Mm.
that might be a public.
I think it would fall into public myself.
Once again, though,
So-
it's public, but it's something
You pay
that
for.
is commercial.
Yes.
So I'd like
But
to
anybody can-
separate public being public and not
That's-
commercial.
That's
versus-
how I feel, is because public would be a free parking garage.
Correct.
Or potentially a parking garage. I'm gonna build this parking garage. The town of Fort Myers Beach has a perpetual lease to charge parking and generate revenue for the town.
That's a
That-
public benefit.
It is a public benefit, but if it's, I'm building a parking garage
And
and
then
you,
you're
the
gonna
public, can
charge
park
me.
here, but
Right.
I'm going to charge you,
Yes.
that's the difference.
So
That's
we could
different.
That's a
redefine
special, maybe special.
free for residents, parking free for residents in this space, or 2 floors
Right.
reserved for residents, whatever we want to
Right.
do. This is where the nuances really matter.
Yes,
And
yes,
this is
yes.
where we challenge the creativity of the presenters to say, and here's how I'm making it for you.
Right.
So here's where you could take it a step further, just to put this out there. If the community wants a parking garage, and I'm not sure whether we want that, but if we do, what you can say is that this is a goal of the town. We want to have a town-owned parking garage. And then the benefits would be maybe in the off season, it's free to residents, or maybe if a hurricane is coming, we allow residents to park on the upper levels, for free. You could organize that in a way, but if you define the parking garage as a goal that the town is trying to meet, and asking the developer when they come in as part of that to contribute to X number of parking spots because we think that they're going to need additional parking that's not provided there. So for example, with the public park that's being offered, there's no parking for the public park. Well, maybe the developer contributes X number of parking spaces to the pot of money that the town is saving to build the public parking. So you're creating a nexus. This is back to Nancy's point,
Yes.
between the actual development, what we think it might need, and then what the town's
goals of
goal
the
is.
town.
If we've stated that outright, that our goal is to build this, and lots of communities do this, where you say that each parking spot is worth $20,000.
Mhm.
And that's what we need you to contribute. And we're going to put it in escrow or in a fund, whatever, for the parking garage. And when the town gets enough money and we've identified land, then we build it. So as a public benefit, yeah, it'll well, in perpetuity, structures have lifespans, but it'll belong to the town as opposed to a parking garage that belongs to a private developer where we have to make agreements about who can park.
So how would you characterize if they said, we're going to create a lot or garage, whatever it is being, and all our employees are going to park there and we're going to shuttle them on the beach so that there's no traffic coming over the bridge? Which category is that going for you if somebody of magnitude chooses to do that?
If they're putting that garage off
Offsite.
island.
And they shuttle their employees in so there's no traffic.
The problem from a staff perspective is how do we monitor that? How do we enforce that? How do we make sure? Because that it's a good idea, but then they're going to have to purchase that land offsite. We don't have any control over what that looks like, what the zoning rules of someplace else is going to be,
Or in effect, how it's used.
or in how it's used, and we don't know, well, somebody, they decide to, there's no way to, I'm just thinking about it from an enforcement perspective, how we enforce it.
Okay.
I think from a town perspective, that thinking about what we can control. We do have town policies, the DRAC is the right acronym,
Yes.
Yes.
drive, don't rent,
Yes.
right? So that's a great idea and program. As far as I know, we don't check on that. We don't know what kind of impact it has long-term. So just thinking about it, because from staff's perspective, we like clarity.
Mhm.
Exactly, what we can count, what we can identify, and what we can control.
So I think that the parking garage has got too many elements to it.
Yeah.
This came up, the offsite parking came up with Margaritaville.
Sure.
This is, well, all right. So what about workforce housing?
I think
Complicated.
I know you can't say the word affordable, but housing that folks working on the island can afford is
Attainable housing.
to me it's not a public benefit.
Special
I think
It's
it's
a
a
special
special benefit.
Well, it's a special benefit to the employee. It's a public benefit
Well-
on an altruistic scale because it helps us staff all of our
Right.
restaurants
Yep.
and
Right.
hotels and everything
It's
else.
a benefit to the
So-
property owner
So
or
it's
business
sort of
owners
be
as
a
well.
balance there.
Yeah.
Yep.
It would-
Because you may not be able
It
to
would be
attract
both.
people to drive on the island unless you pay them double what you'd have to otherwise pay them if they could live
Yeah.
5 minutes from, and they could ride their bike to work.
And maybe help school population.
Exactly.
So it's special in nature.
I think so. Yes.
Especially
Mhm.
Yeah, I would rank that special, even though there's secondary or spin-off public benefits that we
Yes.
can imagine.
Sure.
Well, you
But
can't require
fundamentally,
people
it's
to
a
have
special.
children that live in them, but boy, that is a public benefit to keep Beach Elementary populated.
It's aspirational.
It
for
is.
Sure.
Yes.
Relocation and conversion of above ground utilities to below ground utilities.
Public. I think that's a public
I
benefit.
think that could be
agree.
seen
It's
as a public.
Absolutely a
Yeah, it
public
is.
benefit.
Good.
It's absolutely a public
See how
benefit.
easy this is?
I would think
Yes.
most infrastructure
Anything,
is
yes.
going to be a public benefit.
Yeah, sidewalks, pedestrian access,
Landscape.
undergrounds, visible landscapes are all public
Trolley
benefits.
stops. Those are kind of
So
sad,
that's
I guess.
that's the last one on
That's
Jim's
right.
list here is any significant improvements to public infrastructure. But what about
That are not code required.
Yeah,
Right.
above
They
and
have to be
beyond
Above
code.
and beyond
Yes.
the
Yeah.
code would
Yes.
require.
So, gosh, and I sure wish we could just call a sidewalk instead of a linear park. Do you know how many people have asked me, what's a linear park? Is that for skaters? That was a
Yeah.
question yesterday.
For me to-
Oh, it's a sidewalk, for heaven's sakes. Construct open space malls that are pedestrian oriented and streetscapes as gathering places for the general public. Boy, this is aspirational for
Yeah, it
sure.
is.
Got a dream.
And
Yeah.
yes,
Learn
and
reality.
you know what? If that, well, I'm just thinking about the Arches project. That this would come into play
Oh
there.
yeah.
And
You're
I-
right.
Yeah.
And I would consider that a public benefit.
I would
Me
too.
too.
See, I beg to differ,
Okay.
because with the arches, I really loved the fact that they were gonna do that bay walk, et
Mhm.
cetera, but it was completely a commercial enterprise.
Mhm.
And although the public had access to it, it was strictly for profit.
Mhm.
So it once again becomes a tier different from that, in
Mm.
my mind, that top tier.
Yeah. I don't disagree. Other than I could go walk through that park and not
Not
spend
spend
a
a dime.
dollar. Yeah, or a dime.
Good point,
So
good point. Yeah,
and see the
had
bay
access, it
and see
adds-
the boats
absolutely
and
had
yeah.
access.
So if I
Yeah.
lived in the neighborhood behind there, I could, I would find that a benefit if I lived in the neighborhood because I could go walk that every night and look at the bay.
You've
right? Yeah.
convinced me, Don,
Okay.
because you're
Yeah.
right, I didn't have to pay for
Right.
access to it.
And the other thing I would say is, I weigh those choices against the alternatives. Having that open versus building up to the water and or doing other enclosed structures there, that to me is a public benefit. and it would be attractive in the overall request they have to have that kind of optionality, because we don't have much of that
Yeah.
at all here, where you can walk along the water
Right.
that isn't sand. And
It-
sometimes you just want different shoes.
Yeah, and if exactly, and I think that good point on the arches. The alternative is a marina where I
Exactly.
will never go walk along the
There
water
you are.
because it's not as pleasant, right? And I don't have access because there's a fence around it because it's private property. It's closed after
It's a big
dark,
one for
right,
me.
or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you convinced me. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's a public,
Mhm.
spaces open to the public, attractive spaces,
Yeah,
even if they're
attractive, yeah.
commercially
Yeah.
motivated, but if they're open to the public. I
And
think-
that's where I think LPA town council, we all have to be open to change because change could be good in that particular instance. Again, if there's a lot of other factors to that one, but if somebody, well, Seagate, if Seagate actually, we can't because there's mangroves, but if Seagate was building a, that was public access benefit to me, even if there were, food carts there, right? Or if there were benches and there was a walkway that I could walk on the water, maybe get the ferry or the taxi there, the
Oh,
water
to the-
taxi there.
To the preserve.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that is, if it's truly public access,
Mhm.
You can have a 3-foot wall along your development, your however many story building you have. But if I have public access there, to me, that is a benefit.
Big offset.
Okay. And what about, Jim, this just says ferry to me, create and underwrite an island-wide pedestrian-friendly transit system.
I think ferries included, but I have many other ideas around that.
For
So
example?
we can debate that out.
Yeah.
There are services that exist today in beach communities, in particular, where you have congested traffic, that corporations or non-for-profits, colleges, campuses, hospitals can underwrite. And the entire transportation, micro transportation, is at no cost to the users. And that is a significant public benefit in my mind,
Absolutely.
and it's door to door.
Yeah.
That I can give you more definition around that, outlines around that. It exists, it's tested, it's profitable, it's all the things you want it to be, but it is a change.
I've
And
not heard anybody talk about
I
something
can
like
go
this.
into great detail with that in another setting, and we can talk about how you want to debate that. But I have the information we need to get that into lexicon anytime you want to do it.
Mhm. What do you all think?
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to learn more.
Yes,
It-
so do I.
And I
So do
agree,
I.
it exists. I've seen it. It works, and it's just a matter of having to take the
And we have access to
steps.
it. So
Yeah, right.
we can do that.
Okay. So the only thing that we took out of, well, we took out quite a few. We took so for tier 2, public benefits with significant financial and community-wide benefits, we wanted to redefine parking garage. We develop workforce housing was special, and everything else here was public. Totally public.
And here she comes.
So one of
I
my
see the
questions
smile.
is, so as you all were discussing, I was looking at the language that you currently have in your procedural rules for development agreements. Again, these are like hot off the press. So the 2.16 is a description of any special benefit. I'm thinking that maybe you might want to just add or public benefit,
Agreed.
because it seems like you're drawing a distinction between
Yeah,
the
it's
two.
absolutely a distinction.
Okay.
So instead of eliminating that, add it.
Add it.
Oh, that's a good idea.
That is
Yeah, I like
what
that.
I'm hearing.
Good idea.
But I also want to point out that in 2.16, it does talk about hurricane recovery, which in a way it kind of relates back to what you were talking about with underground utilities. That is related to hurricane recovery in the long term. Being able to mitigate damage from perhaps future storms. So there is still a little bit of an overlap between the two concepts. So in your procedural rules, as far as development agreements, I think adding special or public, that way you don't require them to draw the distinction in the agreement. However, if they're going to go for height,
They have to draw the distinction.
then we're looking at changes to perhaps your comprehensive plan or your land development code where you want to be a little bit more specific.
What I really like about that, and you guys all know my biases now, at least in this topic, is
I was gonna say, I don't
then
know
they
all
got
of them.
then they
but I'm
got to
interested.
then they have to come and
Yeah,
further
and
granularly define within that category
Make
that
their
they're
pitch.
choosing it is. And I love that conversation.
Right.
So I like your approach a lot.
Mhm.
Oh, it's not mine. It's what I'm
Right.
hearing from
Thank
you
you for-
guys.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you for
just-
translating.
providing
for
the
translating
options
our
that you
discussion.
have.
Yes.
Looking for
Yeah.
run for
I know,
that
yeah,
on the
I know, yeah,
record.
yeah.
Okay, so another thing that has been brought up a few times now is the difference between a benefit and an amenity. And I think this is where the discussion about restaurant comes in. Because so many people have debated, is a restaurant a public benefit? So is it a public benefit? Is it a special benefit? Does it fall into our special
I
benefit?
think it falls into the special
Into the
benefit.
special benefit.
Sure.
Yeah, if it's not a private restaurant that I have to pay to go eat at,
Mhm.
you know, that's one thing. If it's a restaurant that's there, I think there is a special benefit to that. And I definitely think there is, back to being a Southie like John.
I think
You know, that's a benefit that everyone I think needs
I
or
think,
feels like they need.
I think we could say, would it be fair to say like any amenity falls into the special benefit category just by the way it's,
Well, it's
Well,
the
if the
reason it's
public has
not.
used to it.
I may not have access to Seagate's pool or hot tub or spa or steam room that's
Amenity
in
for
their
the
building.
development.
Right.
That's what we're talking-
Yeah, that's an amenity for the development. So,
You want it to be special to us
Right.
and give us access to it,
yeah,
and under what conditions?
yeah.
But access will be limited to 75 people
Right.
that pay.
Yeah, and I think
So
that is
those
a
are very
restricted.
special
I think
benefits.
that's a restricted, very restricted special benefits, and I would throw it out of the special benefit category or public benefit category. I would say, hey, that's nice. You know, do it or don't. Right? That's your right. But you know, as a developer or a property owner, but
He's much more chatty in person, isn't he?
Seems to be, we have his full attention, I think.
The non-AI version.
it's very
Just saying.
very hard to
Get a
interrupt
cardboard,
on the screen.
TV screen.
Yeah.
That's good. It's good
I have to go
it's
off
good to
mute.
have you here. Okay, so we've defined.
That was helpful, by the way. Thank you.
Oh gosh, very helpful. So we know what a benefit is versus an amenity. Do you all know what a benefit is versus an amenity? A benefit is a public or a special benefit. An amenity is, to me, an amenity is something that is for the use of the people who belong to the club. That's an amenity.
Right.
I mean, but what's a public amenity is, well, I don't even know that we need to define that.
Let's
Um,
not go there.
No, I don't think so either.
Okay, so the public benefit versus enterprise, I have that in there, and that was mostly discussed relative to the relative to restaurant, and so restaurant has now falls into the special benefit. So should we make a list of what we think? I mean, Jim, you did that, of what you thought examples of public benefits are, or is that helpful?
I think it would be helpful if we could make a list of public benefits, special benefits as examples to help
That's all I would
developers.
agree to is just
As
examples.
only
As
as
a- But only as
Yes.
examples.
Only as
Yeah, not
examples.
as a definition, but as an example to help developers
Right.
understand the kind of things that we see as a public benefit, which has a higher rating than a special benefit, which has a higher rating than what's just really an amenity that they might have provided anyway.
So back to Judith's representation, which was, if we know what the town wants, then we know what to put on our list. So make sure the applicants get exposed to those priorities and desires very early on in the process. We've got a role, an LPA official role. We're not the final role, but we can create that list both under the criteria. It's not exhaustive, but it also may not be the right ones that need to be vetted with the public that say, I get why that's nice, but I live in the real world right now and I need this. So if you're going to, and then we're going to get into ranking. We have to be careful about ranking because then what value to apply to them.
Yeah, I don't think we should rank
And
at all.
so
It would be impossible to be all inclusive.
It would be.
so.
Can I
Exactly.
open up something else? Just, I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time, if it's after the ranking, but it's mentioned in there as part of hurricane recovery and blight. Getting rid of blight. Is there public benefit to that in and of itself? And that's a slippery slope.
You know,
Mhm.
I think blight at this particular moment in our history is subjective because
It
there are
is.
so many people who love the open space on the island and others that would say, well, that's blight. That's blight.
That's why I say it's
Yeah.
a very slippery slope,
Yeah.
but it's something that is referenced and
I watched-
undeveloped land is not blight, but buildings that are dilapidated are blight.
That to me is blight.
I say maybe we could define blight as any structures or buildings that fall below our code standards or are in disrepair or something like that. But I think we
there's-
have to be
I think
careful not
there's
to
a
be
legal
subjective.
definition of
Yeah.
blight already.
yeah, if we could find that, I think that would be important
So
because
how do we make that actionable? Because we're watching forensically what the town's trying to do with property owner rights and blight. And it is an arduous process and one that can be interrupted with nothing more than filing a permit and not moving on that. So if you're talking about a developer coming in saying, I'm buying this property to eliminate these issues, they're going to do that with the property, whether it's an advantage to us or not, because they're not consistent with development. I would struggle with having a broader category like that in or let them make an argument that we're getting rid of blight because it's not happening now. You're not doing that altruistically.
No.
You're doing that as a demolition process.
Yes, yes. And not only that, but getting rid of blight should be something that the code enforces.
There you go.
You know, so I
Maybe that's
mean, we
code
could all
enforcement.
put tags on all the spots on the island right now that we go, why is that still there? Why is it still standing? Yeah, so I don't know how to handle that element that John's bringing up that's in there.
Well, it is subjective.
So- So let's leave it alone. Let's leave
I
it
would-
alone.
Especially if you're talking about dilapidated buildings, because there is a process in
Yeah,
place. for
there's
that, and that
I
can
don't think
be
it is vague. I
longer
think
than
there's a
people would
legal
prefer.
definition in the code.
Well, so
It's
the
unsafe
term-
buildings
yeah,
and
I mean,
unsafe
the-
structures.
The term blight generally comes to us from federal regulations about redevelopment and how we
redevelopment,
qualify for
yeah.
redevelopment money. And there's a pretty loose definition of that. And then people get very defensive when you refer to their property as blight,
Well, sure.
you know, especially if they don't see it that way. But we do have, the town does have a process in place. As I said, it's longer because we have to go through the process because people have property rights. And
So it's not something that's troubling you.
I don't think so, especially because
Okay.
when you're being sent a project, to Mr. Dunlap's point, you're being brought a project, they're intending to redevelop it, so they would have to necessarily demolish
isn't-
what's
yeah, I
there.
think we should just eliminate blight as a concept as far as public or special benefit because it's going to be addressed other ways or is part of the development project anyway. So it just, I don't think a developer can say, well, I'm eliminating blights as a benefit. I think that's not valid.
No.
It isn't the clear argument that perhaps there's no economic benefit to the community of those structures, facilities, and entities. So I'm going to create an economic revenue stream as a result of clearing out those non-productive ones that actually are negative non-productive. We have to pay to get them and getting nothing.
Yes.
So to me, that's the argument
Yeah.
perhaps they ought to be making.
Yeah.
And it is a form of blight when there's no contribution, but there's a drag on the community.
But it doesn't
So,
necessarily
Put that in conversation.
come into play when you're seeing a project. You're absolutely correct. But when we get to this stage of the process, the developer's already agreeing to develop.
Exactly.
Right. So it is a benefit. I 100% agree. It is a benefit to have that back on the tax
Right.
roll and provide the service to the community of whatever they're going to do. But I don't know how
It's
we
not a
would play
benefit that
role.
gains them anything.
No,
At
but
this-
isn't,
at this point in the process?
Yeah.
but isn't there a scenario where maybe somebody's a little too aggressive when they acquired a property and they said, gosh, we can do X, Y, and Z. And they learn at some point, we can only do, X. And then the property sits or gets sold for a loss. And you know what I'm saying? I mean, it can happen. Corporations do it. I've seen them. So I'm just saying there is an extreme there that, that we could push to, right? And we want to be careful to keep that balance.
This is why we recommend before you buy a property, you come and talk to and do what we call a zoning verification letter, where we tell you exactly what you can and can't and what all the rules
Totally
are.
agree, but it doesn't
And
happen.
a
right?
pre-application.
It does
That-
not happen.
That onus is on the
Absolutely.
buyer and the property owner, not on, I mean, the town is already, we have our services available for that reason.
Most everything will get developed at some point in time, but it's a matter of, is there an extended period of time where there's a lot of swirling for years and then it gets sort
Which
of
is
sold
what
off.
everyone's afraid of.
Right, exactly.
And we may get off topic because obviously this one's the squishy one we've dealt with so far. But there are financial motivations that are available. We all know about loss carry forwards,
Mhm.
how you do your equities.
Sure.
Well, same thing happens with property.
Right.
If the property remains damaged, unproductive, and unimproved, but sitting on a very valuable piece of land, unoperating can be, as soon as they scrape it, that land
Mhm.
becomes taxable
Right.
at that baseline. They no longer have any losses against the damaged building to offset the
That's
taxes.
right.
So I'm sure nothing suspicious like that's going on our island, but there are buildings sitting around that have not been scraped, and they
Yeah.
still show different on the asset liability of that corporation than they would if they were scraped. Because now it's a valuable piece of land with an incumbent financial requirement. So getting at this matters because it eliminates a bad motivation too.
Mhm. Mm. So what's your recommendation?
Don't have one, just making sure
I
that you
don't
heard about
either.
it.
Boy, I heard you loud and clear.
No, but the same thing holds true though. A mortgage, even in foreclosure, is an asset. But if it's real estate owned, it's a liability.
There you go. That's the point.
So,
Yeah.
I don't know that we can really go.
Yeah, we gotta leave it alone. It'll be an
I agree.
argument. It's gonna be hard to define.
Yeah.
So then
Okay.
one last piece before we go on to furthering the list, I think you want to do is I want to have the other concept challenged here by the team, that it was important to me that somebody represent the financial impact of these items that we put in here. So if they're going to acquire land, I think they ought to let us know what they paid for that. And of course, we can find that out. If they're going to make other investments. I just don't think it ought to be nebulous and only taken for granted that it is what it is. I think the applicants ought to have a challenge to quantify it. We have the opportunity to challenge their conclusions, because that does, for me, as a financial guy, put the rubber on the road that you spent this, did this, invested in this, donated to this, volunteered to this. All those things are quantifiable to our community, because the alternatives for that is we doing them ourselves or not being done at all. So I'd like to hear the team's reaction to putting the numbers around what they represent as some of these public benefits and see how that tracks.
Can you give me a little more detail on that concept? So like give me some more detail.
So Margaritaville donated a piece of land.
Yes, which we could put a value
What
on.
was that worth?
Yeah.
They could mathematically extend what 25% discount to average users, both the ADRs in their hotel and with their restaurants. That's quantifiable. It's a projection, but it's quantifiable. You can go through that the entire Margaritaville thing and put a financial outcome on what this town is gaining perpetually as a result of
Of it
that
being there.
approach. Right. That's the
Right.
example I would give you.
And there are civic organizations looking for funding to rebuild
Totally.
their places. And if you said, coming to this island, we want to be part of the community, and we're gonna help fund the art association and the women's foundation, and
To the tune of,
to
and
the
for the
tune
length
of,
of,
right, for this much money for this amount of time,
10,000 a year for
and
10 years.
check that box, and then you ensure that it actually occurs.
Doesn't that touch on contract zoning? I don't know. That seems, I like the thought process, but where does that, I don't know where that fits.
I
Hey,
don't
are-
have an answer to your question.
Well, it sounds like these
However,
are impact fees.
well,
No,
Well,
No.
I want
no,
more than
because
that
it,
by a lot.
yeah,
the-
These aren't required.
no,
yeah, so there currently is a process in place. Whenever we adopt an ordinance, we do a business impact estimate. And that's required by Florida law. In the past, land use decisions have been excluded from that process, but I believe there's a recent statutory change where we would have to start doing those. So we're checking right now that that requirement may actually satisfy and answer some of the questions that you all are raising.
Okay.
Jason, you're nodding your head. Do you have something to add to that?
That's, yeah, we're just confirming. So right now on the town website, under the ordinance page, we post those business impact estimates for every ordinance that's proposed. A lot of them are exempt, but we're still posting those anyway. So those are available for public, public visibility anytime on our ordinance page.
What would be exempt, for example?
So as Nancy said, I think some planning and zoning, if it's just following state statutes, that sort of thing, and on that business impact estimate, it'll have what the reason why it's exempt, but we're still filling those out, just to be proactive on our part too.
But
So,
what Jim and Don are talking about is a way step above that.
sure.
It's
Oh,
in it.
it's granular and
Right.
it's,
It is.
it needs to be defended.
But could I ask a question maybe for Nancy, back to the contract zoning?
Yeah.
So Seagate, for instance,
Mhm.
across the street from Seagate is the Art Association property. If Seagate said, I'm going to rebuild the Art Association, I'm going to pay for that building, not going to fit it or anything, I'm just going to build the structure and I'm going to put $1 million at it or whatever. Is that contract zoning or is that a
That's
is that a
going to
public?
be with the art association. That would be their private agreement that they have. I
Yes,
don't
but if he
s-
says that in the course of his, if he had, because he
Right.
has not
No.
said that, if he had said that in the course of his public hearing, saying,
His
and
development
something else
approval.
I'm going to do is blah.
You know, this is adjacent to my property. One of the properties I'm going to affect potentially by building a 17-story building. Is that I'm trying to figure out, is that that's a civic 5013C organization, I think.
Yeah,
So
I don't think that the town
Okay.
is really involved in that specifically.
Unless we're considering that action as part of our approval
Right.
process.
and I'm just trying to figure out, can
Because that's,
Can
I-
we-
I
could,
don't-
could
yeah,
that be
I
a
don't-
Are we
benefit?
allowed to?
I
That's
don't
the question.
think
Right.
so.
No? Okay.
No. What you would be requiring is the local government to contract with a not-for-profit
So
as,
No,
as a
No,
condition.
we're not
requiring,
requiring it.
requiring
No.
or rewarding. And I go to Vice Mayor's conversation yesterday, which was extensive around the art
Mhm,
group.
mhm,
It was clear connection to me,
mhm.
wink, wink, nod, nod, or have a conversation. And the president of the Art Association came up and acknowledged the conversations happening and it mattered to him. It matters to me. So requirement versus the acknowledgement, I think are different things, but they're powerful things.
They are powerful. Yeah.
so I guess.
They're
my-
valuable to the community. Sorry.
They're valuable. No, they are, but they're very valuable to the community. So I guess my question would be, you two are saying this very passionately. Where else does this happen? And is there something that we could formulate that to say, hey, this is another criteria that we'd like to look at and address. How are you going to impact the overall community? And in a way that it is legal for us to do so.
Correct.
Because you couldn't say, "Hey, Matt, if you build that that art association, we're going to let you have your 17
Right.
stories."
Right.
You can't say that.
No.
So who
But-
gives,
It might come into effect
pick
January
John
1st.
Q developer, who gives that entity or that individual an orientation of our community? Where does the conversation around, here's the things that matter to us, here's the things we value, here's the way we behave. It's not documented that you better do this or you're out. It's an appreciation and a representation of the underlying culture and the ability they have to accelerate their involvement in a way that adds a lot of distinction to me versus someone from another city coming in and sending their business development people, making offers to the land and by rights do what they want to do. Whole different feeling during the interaction of the people I want to be around. I don't know where that orientation happens. Again, not that's staff's responsibility to do it. They're trying to follow what we give them. But I wish there was some of the
Oh,
other
so
communities
do I,
I've
now
lived
that
in.
You put it that way because that's almost like a comprehensive plan goal. That's
Yeah.
almost like talking about, as this community redevelops, we aspire to having folks who are coming to the island or folks who are redeveloping to have a greater impact. Is that making you nervous?
It makes me a little bit nervous. I wouldn't, and I'm looking at Nancy again, to define the types of developers you want. Yes, you want a good neighbor, right? You want a community partner, and they're certainly able to say that when they come before you. But you should be judging the project on its merits. And those things, I mean, there's such things as voluntary proffers. If he came and he said, I want to give, you know, $1,000 to the Fort Myers Beach Art Association, that money would probably have to pass through the town, and then we would turn that over so that we can verify that. So you have to also think about the enforcement and the legal structure. Everybody wants a good neighbor who's part of the community, but it makes me, you know, uncomfortable to think about defining
So
Can
I
types
think we're at two
of
different ends of the spectrum. When it gets to
relationships.
you, I
Yeah.
agree. It ought to be
Yeah,
there.
I
I'm
totally
talking
agree.
about
Yeah.
much earlier than that.
Right.
The Nexus, when I was running the chamber in Orlando, the chamber took full responsibility for this role. And you as a CEO in that community had to sign up to be available 3 or 4 times a year to meet with potential developers or people that want to move companies to Orlando, et cetera. And that was a 2 or 3 hour luncheon about who we are, what we care about, we value. And it's funny how that altered
So
their first interactions when it came to the requests then, that we didn't ordain or demand, but it always showed up and it kept things the way they ought to be.
yeah, I have
Community
seen,
outreach.
seen that where
Yes.
certain organizations, and is it Chamber 501c3 or is it, but anyway,
I don't
certain
believe so.
organizations given roles within the community. So you might be maybe not required, but asked to meet. These are the tiered organizations that the town council is going to take their input funds from, that you have to meet with first. I mean, I'm looking to the attorney to put that
Yeah.
in legal format. I don't know if that necessarily is a requirement as much as a suggestion that this is, but again, I'm a little hesitant to give any power to an outside organization that's not the town.
No, I would agree with Judith, but I think you can have community outreach meetings. I think you could require that.
Yes, this is something
what
that
I'm
could,
after.
yes, exactly. This is something that could come up in any one of these, you know, events that the developers so far have had. That could be something that would be brought up in those sort of, in that sort of environment. I hadn't thought about that.
Can I just
and
dig
I'm
this?
surprised I hadn't thought about
It's a
that.
teeny tiny bit forward. If Matt had come to us and said, hey, by the way, remember the like 3,000 square foot of space that was, I can't remember. It's like we were trying to figure out what it was, or there was some space that was in the building on the not beach side that was, I can't remember. We were trying to figure out what it was going to be used for. Like, is it a convention center or whatever? If Matt had come to us and said, well, I'm going to actually make that space available in perpetuity for a civic organization, as, you know, for instance, you know, he knows about the property across the street and what it's for, right? I'm going to make space available in my development for that. Is that a special benefit or a public benefit? If he said, I'm going to give the art association 3,000 square foot to have a, you know, their place and a gallery,
It's a
is that,
special benefit.
it's a special benefit. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Special benefit.
Right.
And it would matter.
Yes.
It would
matter.
absolutely matter
It would matter.
to most
Yes.
everyone in this
That's the
community.
whole concept.
It would
That's
And
where I
again,
was
I know
trying to
you
get
guys
to.
like requirements because you can live safely within them. I'm talking about encouragement
Mhm.
and not sudden, clear communication.
This solves a
encouragement.
problem, right?
That's
It
it.
solves a problem for this community in rebuilding.
Mhm.
It prevents a further, you know, maybe potentially a hurricane from damaging a civic organization's property again. And I know that's, I'm just using one example.
And
There
it's
are many
rebuilding
others.
the community, not
Right.
just rebuilding projects.
Exactly. It's not just taking that property and saying, I'm going to put a bunch of residences on it or rental condos or
Now's the
whatever.
time to do that because
Yeah.
there's so many options
There are.
that it's hard to pick a priority because there's so many. So let
And it's-
natural convergences
Yeah.
happen.
And it's peanuts for a development.
Exactly.
It's peanuts to make that happen. It's like,
Those two
but
are
it's
very
huge.
dangerous.
They're doing a great job.
Golly,
It
those-
really, Jim's inspiring me. I usually don't come up with this kind of stuff.
May I ask a clarifying question? So previously, I believe Mr. McLean and Ms. Saracita, you mentioned, how do we quantify parks? What's their value? And from an environmental planning standpoint, I think it's a really, really tough question, but a really important question. And also I would add one additional question on top of that. Is there a point when we have too many parks and their value is not worth as much? Or will
No.
we take every piece of land that we could possibly get and figure out how to use it later?
You're
But
talking about the
my
law of
point is, if we're
diminishing
go-
returns kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Yeah.
But my,
Uh,
my point, I think largely is if we're going to look at how we're going to quantify what the output of a developer is, how much skin they have in this game, to your point, Anita, I think is the exact point. At some point, when you look at the ones and zeros in front of you, you're getting a signal that says the value of fallow land, even if it's a social benefit, is much more difficult to quantify than here's this built thing I'm giving you access to, or I built you a bathroom. And it's important to me. I think there's unquantifiable or hard to quantify social benefits that often get kind of pushed off because nobody knows how to quantify them.
You know, Jason, when I raised that issue earlier, what I was speaking specifically to was the financial notion of deeding property to the town.
Mhm.
If it's a passive park, for example, there's no revenue stream from that. It's like, boom, it's off. And so does that become a negative, in fact? And like you're saying now, if at some point, what if we have so much park space that it becomes a negative impact for the town? I mean, I think that might be a lovely place to have to be to deal with that problem, but I don't know how realistic that is.
Yeah,
you
agree.
know?
The land is
It's-
so incredibly expensive and
Exactly,
valuable here.
exactly,
There's not going to be
exactly.
a whole plethora
Yeah,
of those donations made in my mind.
Yeah.
And we'll kind of know when it's there and the conversation will change.
absolutely. But to me, I mean, I've said this about Times Square. You know, 50 years from now, the decisions that we make right now, or the council makes right now, 50 years from now, what do those people think about the decisions we made? Are they glad that that the new hotel was built, or are they glad that they have a place to sit and look at the beach? I personally think they're glad that they have a place to sit and look at the beach, because not everybody will have access to the hotel. But that's just my point of view. But just to make our vision quest here for a definition of public benefits, which I think we've narrowed down. Can we give some examples, some real examples, not special benefits, of only public benefits? So Jim made a list, this Jim.
Mhm.
So reduced density is in the comp plan. We shall reduce density wherever we have a chance to do that. To me, that's like an ultimate public benefit because it reduces traffic, it reduces impact on the island. Do you all agree with that?
Sure.
Yes.
View corridors, we've talked about ad nauseum.
Clear.
Publicly deeded open space and beachfront access, that's kind of like a view
Yep.
corridor, but not really, but publicly deeded, I think is super important. So to me, that's another good example of a public benefit. The same with parking spaces. Road right-of-way dedication.
Mhm.
Eliminating curb cuts on Estero Boulevard. Is that a public benefit?
It sure helps traffic.
It
It does. You're right. It does. Do you all agree it's a public benefit?
I do.
And permanent source of periodic funding for town infrastructure? Jim, I didn't understand this one.
Let's say that we're going to need a new fire station, a new water filtration plant, anything. But the particular development shouldn't bear the cost, the entire cost. So we talked earlier about it. They make a contribution to the city accumulates the money to do the infrastructure project. I think we said $20,000
Yeah.
for a parking spot. Well, there are studies that will say, at some point, we're currently upgrading the stormwater system.
Mhm.
Well, that's definitely a public benefit, but the particular development would only be required to do it on site. So making a contribution to the benefit of the public for a larger project.
How does that work?
Yeah, let me give you an example that I thought of, kind of embedded in my document a little bit under this category. So this is a real life example. So it's Friday. holiday weekend, down at the end of Egret. Truck is backing up, hits the above ground water meter there.
Yeah.
So we have a beautiful geyser for a while to enjoy. And town comes and takes care of that and shut it off. We immediately, you're the recipient of a boil water notice until we get 2 consecutive days. Well, Friday, holiday weekend. So Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday on our street before we had that 2 consecutive days. And that's because we outsource that process through proper laboratories and proper equipment, which is available. So wouldn't it be something if one of our partners coming here said, we're gonna underwrite the cost of having on-site water quality so your team can do it 24 hours and Saturday or Sunday, whatever they want to do, because the machine's sitting there and it'll do all that. So $30,000-$50,000 for that, and then the appropriate training and certifications, we pick up a benefit for our town and our residents that's material to sitting 5 days without water or with having to boil it. When I think of that kind of thing that these partners can do, I see huge leaps in those little things that are nothing to them in the grand scope, but really materially impact quality of life here. Just an example that I have.
Okay, I get how it would work. Okay, so that's definitely a public benefit.
So we, when I was listening to Jim speak, and what went off in my mind was impact fees. It
Yep.
sounded like
Right.
you were describing that. And that already is a component in our development agreements.
Right.
Not as a public
How far
benefit,
along
but the
is the
required
town?
payment, so that we have infrastructure in place at the time of development.
And how far along is the town in that process right now?
So the town council asked that question yesterday, and Sarah said she was going to get them an update. So certainly we can have one for the November 12th meeting for you all, if not by next Monday at the town council meeting. But I know that it's Access Infrastructure, the company Sarah works for, that's doing that process, and they have met with all the town staff, and I believe that they've collected a lot of the information. But that's going to capture the impacts, like you said, of the specific property. So if that property needs additional pumps for water, I'm just coming up with things for the actual
Yeah.
property. That's why when we were talking about the development agreement, we separated out off-site improvements. So what you're saying would fall under that category. And when you are doing a development agreement, you can, as we've done, think about those things. But it has to be something that is directly connected to the property. But maybe not happening exactly within their property, but happening in the right of way, immediately adjacent, or directly impacting their
Or
property.
it could be, right, if it's a 17-story, we might need a taller ladder truck, for instance, right, in the town. So the impact to the town could be greater, right? I mean, there are things like that. Or to your point, booster stations to push water up,
So the booster for the water pressure, and I know that came up yesterday, that's on the developer.
right,
So
within the site,
they're
right?
going to want that because
Right.
they're going to want water
Yeah.
pressure.
Well, they have
But
to have fire flow too.
The town's not going, they have to automatically, that's not going to be covered in the impact.
No, but
fee.
see, if like, for instance, just to explore it. So I'm in the business, so water and sewer. So if, is the main that's going down Estero Boulevard large enough to provide the capacity for the boosters to actually push the water? I think it is, but I'm just saying as an example, that would be hey, you've got to actually increase the size of the pipe from point A to point B to
Yes.
get you the water pressure. And that could be a special impact fee for that development.
Yeah, I mean, and that's true in the reverse in the sewer
Right.
as well, making sure
Exactly.
those, and that'll
Or
be,
capacity
should
for
be
the sewer.
captured.
Well, the same
sewer
would
is-
be true for oversizing too.
Right. But we may have to pay the county for sewer treatment, right? So we may need to pay them impact fees for, if that's 10,000 per equivalent residential connection, then we're going to charge them 10,000 times that at the town, because we're going to just pass that right to the county. The town doesn't get a benefit from that though. And that's what I think we need to be careful with. There are actual costs to the town for a development to occur, and that needs to be collected. And then that's sort of the minimum. That's what's required. And if there's anything additional, like, I don't know what it would be, to your point, something that's different and out of the ordinary that the town wants, or a ladder truck, hey, we need an
Sure.
extra $1 million to, have a truck that has a long enough ladder, kind of thing. And
Well-
so again, there's ways around that, but that would be probably a poor example, but there may be something
Not,
like
but
that.
not to get too granular, but these kind of things end up mattering. The amount of water pressure going down that big main, I'm volunteering to help one of the condo units boards navigate through our process. Just because they can't do it on their own. These people aren't used to this. So as we're going through the 50% stuff and all that, obviously the fire pump in there for their building became a big issue. So we spent some time with the fire department and learned because of where they sit on the main, if your PSA going in front of that building is sufficient, you can put a tap on there at your cost and not have to put a fire pump under the building for all those residents now. It was an extraordinary elimination of an expense that they wouldn't have had. But if we had those kind of conversations with people that are doing infrastructure, all the condo units to some degree of scale could benefit financially and maintenance wise, et cetera, and insurance by not having to make an investment individually, but collectively, this was an impact to the town. And that's a live example that we literally just got signed off on and done. So this can matter under this infrastructure thing way beyond the development itself.
Right. Completely agree.
I don't even know where to put that. That's not my area, but you're absolutely right.
Well, I'm trying to keep on
So
what
you could-
Pat's talking
Absolutely.
about.
The point
Absolutely.
is, there are benefits, or there are things the town could get
Well,
from new development.
maybe like an example like this. So I want to put in a 17-story building. I know I'm going to need fire pumps and everything, but also the town has a booster pumping station
Mhm.
by the bridge where it gets water from Lee County, and the town's pumping station needs work. It got damaged in the hurricane. I'm going to make a contribution
Yeah.
to fixing that
Accelerate
pumping
infrastructure,
station.
yeah.
I mean, that would be probably a reasonable example, what you're talking
In
about.
real life, and it could happen now, way before the development ever happens, right? It could help the town accelerate its
As
restoration.
soon as they get their approval, I think is what
Right.
you're saying.
Right.
Yeah.
So if I could just, yeah, so one, again, it's got to have when we're talking about a specific project, it's got to have a direct nexus if we're requiring it. If it's a voluntary proffer on behalf of the developer, that falls in a different category. But if we're, just because
Yeah.
we're at 11 o'clock, thinking about the second half of this. So if you're requiring or asking for these things, what are they getting in return? Because if that's how we're still thinking about this, height versus public benefit, or something else, because I think there's lots of things we can ask for, but the developer's going to want to know, like, what am I required to do in exchange for what I would like to do, if that's where we're.
But the most compelling things are not just those that you require. They're those that you offer in addition to what's required, back to his setback. So I know why you're concerned and you continue to remind us of that, and that's the right thing for you to do. I think very few of these get embedded in thou will if they
Yeah,
want
not a
anything else.
requirement, right?
Right. But to make the concepts available, of the examples available, because there's too much, I don't know what you guys really want. I'm trying to create it. So stop us short of putting in something you don't think is enforceable or doesn't have a nexus. Shouldn't eliminate us from having the conversation of what we want, value, and would like people to offer to be part of.
So maybe that's an important distinction when you have this conversation with town council. So there's part like this public benefit, what we have in the comp plan, what we have in the code, where we're talking about the benefit versus the height. So you're going to get some more feet, and this is but then we're talking about additional other things that are town goals, maybe,
That's it.
or enumerating that some other way, so that when a developer comes in and we're going to have a development agreement conversation about.
But this actually goes to what Jim said early. And nobody thinks that the staff should be empowered to do that. These negotiations should be happening at a different level, whether it's here or town council, but there's no reason not in a development agreement to be able to put all of these things on a list and negotiate them with them.
So I 100% agree with you. Staff does not want to be involved in those things, but how it's the development agreement is set up right now, that's not the process. So the process, and I don't know if Nancy, you want to go over that, how that's specifically
Well,
set up, is for that negotiation to take place and then bring it
And
to
then
you.
bring it to us.
Yeah.
And that's where we got uncomfortable. To be.
And I understand that. And I know that the town manager and the staff
Bingo,
and the attorney
bingo,
negotiated
bingo.
that document before we saw it.
That is
So-
absolutely right. And when the other council I sat on, another community, the town manager in the same weak mayor form of government we have, was part of the presentation group to the city council, to us, around why they negotiated what they did and how they got there. Actually co-authored, if you will, or certainly was commingled with it. What I would want a town manager to have is a document that says, get these things in the conversation.
Yeah.
Nothing illegal about that. And then when you come to see us on council, you will represent how those negotiations went. And we started from here and these got added. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
No, I think that would be extremely helpful.
That's what I'm used to seeing from
Because
a development.
when you look
agreement.
at the document, that's what Sarah was trying to represent yesterday. It says, have you provided us with these things? And yes, you provided us with,
But they're
and-
ministerial in nature. I mean, they're just, exactly.
right, we need a survey of
have
the
7
property, we need a
copies, exactly.
legal description, you know, I mean, all, and which they of course provided to us, but then when it got to the, so I think that makes sense.
That's how we marry the two visions in
The
my
attorney
mind.
is the official
Well,
sayer of whether
yes,
it
but-
works.
But we don't necessarily make value judgments as to what the special benefit or the public benefit is. Our role is really to make sure that whatever is negotiated by staff and the town manager, that it's legally enforceable.
Mhm.
We are a little bit more reactionary. I can't say the word.
Reaction.
Yeah, there you go. Just like at today's meeting, I mean, you all are having the conversation, and then I'm going to go back and make sure that what you're proposing is okay under Florida and federal law.
It's almost like we're proposing two paths, or maybe two documents, or the actual zoning process that is the development agreement, and then maybe another document that embodies all the things we've brought up here as I don't know, as topics or as
But that could be in the comp plan. It doesn't, you don't have to create a
Right.
whole new
It's not
document.
going to the development. code.
Okay.
If sewer and water infrastructure is a goal and that should be
No problem with that.
something considered, we can, you know, I mean, I believe it's already in the comp plan, but so we can identify what those things are.
to
We
create
have the
to create
documents.
the next.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Got it.
And I don't think we need a new
Got it.
word. These are
No,
definitely
no.
public benefits.
Yes, they are
in
public
the, in the
benefits. for sure.
subcategories we have now under that, I think it fits there. I wouldn't overcomplicate it.
Yeah.
I just want to empower it,
Yep.
illuminate it, make it that kind of conversation that you want to be part of if you want to come to our town.
So the other thing I want to add is that the consistency with the comprehensive plan is vital to these development agreements, because if you are inconsistent with the comp plan, that pretty much ends the conversation.
So if we start with a definition of a public benefit as something that is accessible, I'm using your words now, Jim, accessible to or for the benefit of all in a with unique nature or physical location for a perpetual commitment to the town of Fort Myers Beach. We've kind of ballooned or blossomed. That's what a public benefit is. And then the details, and then a special benefit is something that is exclusive to a subgroup, to a particular group of people. And then in the examples, you know, once it meets that threshold, the examples we've pretty much itemized as things that are examples of that and hopefully could be embodied.
Yeah, I think that would be something that we can further evaluate and perhaps move forward with. So what I have in my notes is provide examples of other public benefits, which is cross-referenced back to your comprehensive plan language in the LDC for administration of Hythe requests, as examples in your LDC section 34-631. And then perhaps include first a sentence embodying the definition that you've proposed, and then follow it up with these are some examples. And then also propose changes to 2.16 in your procedures to add public benefits, special benefits, or public benefits, and to include amenities as a special benefit. And to, there's just a change to affordable housing to workforce housing. That's what I have so
The
far.
only thing we have not touched on is, where does it get you? What does it get you? Can it get you 17 stories? Can it only get you 10?
Not going
And
to get me to
only-
go there.
Yeah.
I don't want to quantify that.
That's a
But I
challenge.
do want to, back to what Judith was saying, I had a hard stop, like another board meeting to get to. So I just want to make sure where you started with this was, what's the next step, the timing, and how do we get this to council? So if you don't mind,
Nope.
I'm still here to participate a little bit in that. We've made some progress. I'm sure we have further to go, but I also don't want to miss the opportunity to publicly put out what we think we're going to do with this and what we think that ought to look like.
So Nancy, the next step for you is to quantify what we've discussed here today and put it
Yes.
in a document form.
Yes,
And then that will be
discussed at the 12th.
Yeah.
at the 12th. We'll discuss it at the
Oh,
12th.
good, okay.
And hopefully, sometime between now and the 12th, the town council will set a date for a joint meeting where we can finalize something here. And in the meantime, we're going to have all sorts of cases come forward. So I think the sheer fact that we've had this discussion puts folks on alert.
So whether it's a joint meeting or whether or not they have a discussion along the lines that we're having, and then we get
Absolutely.
together like most houses of Congress
Yep.
do, and then
Yep.
have a compromise committee, at least we have everybody on a conceptual record. So can I ask you a question on the document? I don't want to violate any laws, why I ask you. So when you create that, does that come to us for review part of the 12th, or does it go to the public domain all at the same time?
Well, it'll come to you for review, but your agenda and all its backup materials, that is
But
all
do we get it ahead of
public.
time before it's on the agenda, before the agenda's published? Are you going to send it to us individually?
Not that's usually not part
Okay.
of our
Okay, but
process,
can
but
we-
if you
But
have
could we-
questions,
could
then
we
you
do
could call
this?
me.
Could,
Yeah. Okay.
because Jim has invested so much time and this Jim has invested so much time in this, could we ask you to send it to get input from these two members on this?
They can call. I can have a conversation with them. A lot of times what happens is before, well, usually it's after an agenda goes out, there's individual conversations with members of boards and
That's
council.
after the fact. What about in the process? of
So if
this?
I have questions interpreting the materials that they've provided, I can call them.
Draft review.
A draft review. What about a draft review, Nancy?
How
Say yes
about
to that.
how about giving me the discretion if I need to ask questions?
Okay, whatever. I just, I know how important this is, but I have not given it the deep dive that you have, or these guys that are in that field,
But so not
It's-
to miss an opportunity.
Exactly.
I think council has an M&P on the 7th.
Mhm.
Can we get our document into the conversation for that agenda? Because we're not meeting again until the
Which-
12th, our draft.
We could give them a summary of what you've discussed today,
Okay.
but I would not.
Summary is good.
I like it.
Yeah, because I don't want to misrepresent in writing what I'm
Well,
hearing
it would-
today.
A summary
So-
would be good to them, so at least we know we're on the right track. Because I'll tell you what, this morning I had a conversation with somebody because I was, like I said, I was feeling discombobulated because I don't know if I'm on the right track or not. I really don't know. I don't know. I'm very, yeah, I don't
Okay.
know. So it'd be nice to have some direction. Maybe they look at this or listen to what we've said and say, it's a bunch of, whatever. it'd be nice to know.
Okay.
Because I
So
have
we
other
can give
things
a-
I could
a
spend my time
summary
on.
Of,
Right?
we can give them a summary of what's been discussed
Do you
today.
think that would be helpful, Judith?
I mean, a summary to let them know what's been happening, but I think really the meeting, what I wanted to avoid is you presenting us information and then us presenting it back to the town council without you all there, right?
Right.
So that's why I think the joint meeting is really essential, but certainly a summary of what we
But
discussed.
I think a
would be
joint
very helpful.
meeting can be a conclusionary meeting,
Sure.
clarifying and distillation meeting. The conceptual meeting, I think unpolluted with that back and forth, we get their opinions and their attitudes on the record a bit so they can influence the document, and then we have whatever that joint meeting looks like together. And my goal in going to that bid, we're going to come out with a substantial amount of agreement on things,
'Cause the
post
other-
compromise.
The other thing to keep in mind too is that we will need to schedule comp plan public input meetings.
Oh, sure.
And so
Right.
that question can
Yeah.
also be asked to the public at that time if you
Love it.
feel like that's appropriate. And then after that is finalized, then I assume there's going to be land development code public meetings. So as we're thinking about how these things get added into and formalized. So I don't know when you're envisioning, like, because you're saying the joint meeting would be the end stage.
No,
Do
no,
you-
for our role in that public reaction and feedback, and whatever the right way is to do all that, the more the merrier.
I think, Judith, the whole idea is to get off go. Because if this has been talked about, and it's like, let's just say, here's what it is. And so we eliminate, I mean, if I hear another time, we don't know what we can do. Well, yes, you do know what you can do. Here's the plan. This is what you can do. What you don't know is what you can get and what you need to do to get something. So if we could memorialize that, the sooner that we do this, the better for the residents and for the developers. And for you guys.
So Judith, I know that there was originally, we've had a couple storms come through, but what is the thoughts for the larger community meetings that we've been talking about, that Andy was talking about? For,
Comp plan.
I'm not 100% sure. There is an outside consulting group who has been handling the
Okay.
comp plan, and so we have to schedule them. You know, the storms obviously changed everything,
course.
and so we would like to do it before the end of the year, but I don't want to speak to that. I don't know exactly when that's
No,
been scheduled.
that's fair. I just want to
But
make
as is-
sure that it's still
The,
front and center, because it's
yeah,
really important.
the comp plan has to come first. We can't really
Yep.
deal with the land development code until the comp plan is done. That's why I'm asking about, I think it makes sense for you to have this meeting with the town council, so you all are on the same page and you've had that discussion. And then the public can maybe opine on where you've come to and tell you all whether they're in agreement. And then we put that into the comp plan, and then maybe there's another meeting before the land development code and that public process. But I'll talk to Sarah and the town manager about when they envision that
Yeah.
happening.
I mean, I think this is incredibly valuable because it at least puts out what our opinions and
Airs it.
perspectives, it's out there. And
Mhm.
I'm certain that council is going to watch and understand some of what we see. Some are here.
I just want some closure.
Well,
Yeah.
listen, we're not all going to, we're all
Meaningful.
not going to agree, but we all certainly need to get it out there, what we're thinking, right?
Yeah.
So let's just continue to shed light on all of that. I mean,
Okay, well, I hope this was valuable, and we'll do it again. And so, Jim, I'd just ask you to be in touch with Nancy. Jim, I'd
And
ask
I
you
may
to
be in touch with
Nancy.
the rest of you guys too,
Good.
just so you know.
Good.
Totally fine.
Anita, I need to ask, I am not going to be able to make the November 12th meeting,
Okay,
which I feel bad about, but I just can't make it.
we'll excuse you.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I'm glad you guys were all appointed. And does anybody else want to say anything before we say we're going to leave? Okay,
Motion to adjourn.
thank you.
Second.
It's 11:24 and we stand adjourned.